Welcome to Conversations with CSG, the global talent podcast from CSG Talent. We interview influential figures across a wide range of innovative and impactful industry sectors worldwide, discussing career journeys, overcoming challenge, achieving success, diversity, and much more. I'm sure you'll see value in a lot of the topics we cover. So here it is. Hope you enjoy. Welcome to Conversations with CSG. Today we're joined by Tina Squire, founder and MD of Adeptina. Tina, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Well, thank you for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be here.
Fantastic. I'm keen to delve into your career journey, your own personal challenges and successes in relation to neurodiversity, as well as hearing some of your expert insights into neurodiversity in the workplace. So let's dive straight in and talk neurodiversity. It's definitely a term that we hear more and more, maybe more so in recent years. And I know that we've already had previous conversations and discussions around this. You've talked through executive functioning and neurodiversity. What is executive functioning and what are some of the common neurodiverse conditions?
In terms of neurodiversity, it's important to note that neurodiversity in itself isn't a diagnosis, as it were. It's a catch-all term for things like ADHD and autism, dyslexia, dyscalculia, lots of those types of neurodevelopmental conditions that fits into the umbrella neurodiversity. It's great that somebody has come up with the term because it's a very useful term, especially in the workplace, to have something that addresses all of that. And it's essentially a unique way of processing information. You see the world and interact with it in a different way. It isn't a bad thing, it's just different. And that's what I think we all need to really understand. Instead of thinking that they are problems or challenges, we talk a lot about challenges within neurodiversity. And that is because society and workplaces don't tend to be set up naturally to accommodate these different ways of thinking and operating. And that's why we end up in this language of challenge and difficulty. And you mentioned executive functioning there as well. Some people would say that neurodiversity is a type of executive functioning disorder, if you will, or because a lot of the challenges refers to the mental processes around how we, I say we because I have ADHD, I have dyscalculia, so I will refer to we a lot when I talk about neurodiversity. How we manage ourselves and our resources and our tools and how we prioritize. So executive functions essentially include things like prioritizing or just general task management. And that can be task management at work, but it can also be task management in life. How do you get your laundry done every week and how do you remember to do it? And it changes a little bit as we go through life as well, right? We're at different stages and we focus on different things. It also includes things like time management and planning, prioritizing, impulse control, emotional regulation also sits within that.
And when you've spoken about executive functioning before, the explanation that everyone has that function, it's just
yes,
the different times of some people might have a temporary impact to executive functioning, whereas neurodiversity is more of a constant impact.
That's a really, really good point because yes, a key thing about executive functions is that it isn't just something that we have as neurodiverse. We all have executive functions because we all plan and prioritize and organize, and we can relate to that. So if you are not neurodiverse, when you've struggled, maybe when you haven't had enough sleep or you have a new baby and you're feeling brain foggy and can't think straight and you can't function properly, that is your executive functioning being challenged and you're struggling. The difference between someone who we like to call neurotypical versus neurodiverse is that struggle tends to finish when that period of time goes away, right? If we catch up on sleep or the baby grows up, that kind of thing. Whereas for neurodivergent individuals, it doesn't go away. It's always there. It's something we have to work with and build tools to better function around.
Yeah, so it's relevant and important for everyone to be aware of neurotypical, neurodiverse, and have that understanding of what others potentially might be experiencing different to what you are as an individual. I know you mentioned challenges and perceptions. What would you say are some of the common misconceptions about neurodiversity that you encounter throughout your coaching?
Neurodiversity as a trend is probably one of them. So thinking that everybody is a bit ADHD or we're all on the spectrum, which isn't entirely untrue that we're all on some sort of spectrum, but it isn't a trend. There are good reasons why neurodiversity is getting a lot of attention at the moment. There is an increased awareness both amongst medical professionals and society as a whole. We do see a lot more on social media. So it's not that people are suddenly catching this thing. It's that they are becoming aware that this might be part of why they've always struggled with these things. So neurodiversity as a trend is not helpful, and it is a misconception. It's about awareness and new understanding and of what it actually is. I think in workplaces, it's that when somebody has a diagnosis, this is the thing that's going to help. A one-size-fits-all approach is a definite misconception. We have this saying, if you have met one neurodiverse person, you have met one person who is neurodiverse. It does not signify what their challenges are. Even when you go into specific labels, there was a Cambridge study on this 19 when they looked at 1,500 kids and they mapped their challenges, and they have these clusters of challenges. Some had emotional regulation was more of a problem, organization was more of a problem. These challenges did not match any particular diagnosis. So the challenge that somebody has isn't resolved by, oh, they've got ADHD, therefore they are like this, and therefore we give them this toolkit to support them. It's super important to understand what people's challenges are. And I say that really broadly. I think that's really important in workforces in general, right? As employers, we want to know what makes people work best. How do we get the most out of our people? Isn't that what everybody wants? And that doesn't actually require any labels, but it does require understanding of what people, I want to say not what their challenge, but how they work best. And that's always a really powerful reframe, I think.
Definitely. And like you say, the one size fits all, it's about having that awareness and understanding, but not applying that to everybody with that specific condition, on an individual basis.
That one size fits all approach as well. Often, even when people have maybe a limited understanding of neurodiversity, it might be that having misconceptions like they can't be a team player, or they don't like social situations, or they can't do X, which means they're not neurodiverse, or if they can do that, they're not neurodiverse. It's just not true. It's really important that we understand people as individuals. And with that include all people. And that's a real power for workplaces.
Absolutely. And you mentioned there's a lot more awareness and more people being diagnosed, and that's the result of more awareness and understanding. We're seeing more people being diagnosed, as adults, and that's something that you experienced yourself. You received a diagnosis as an adult. How would you say neurodiversity has impacted your career, and how have you overcome those challenges having that late diagnosis?
Yeah, so I got diagnosed sort of in my late 40s. Obviously, I have the advantage of hindsight here, but looking back, I was able to really change the label from there's got to be something wrong with me. I'm probably just lazy. I just work really differently to everybody else, or I work really slowly. I'm a slow learner. I'm a slow processor, to, I have ADHD. That's a completely different label that you can work with in a completely different way. And it is a question I get a lot. Do you really want that label, or what is it about that label? Well, actually, we all have labels. We label ourselves all the time. And understanding that you have a neurodevelopmental condition, or that your brain just works differently, is very different to you thinking that you're somehow slow or lazy. So it enables you to then remove those labels and work with, okay, ADHD, what is that? How can I work with that? And that is really what it did. There was a huge amount of shame that fell off for me. I didn't even know I had it, right? I was just told that this was ADHD, and I had an understanding of what it was already because both my sons got ADHD. Which is a common way for adults to get diagnosed these days. But as I walked out of the doctor's office that day, I was physically lighter. It was just a completely different platform to stand on. And in work, it took a month or two maybe for me to get used to the idea and finding my vocabulary and why did I want to speak to work about it. that was important for me to figure out for myself. And within that, I was figuring out, what do I want here? I held the title at the time of Digital Channels Director, and I had lots of important client relationships, and I was part of senior management in those companies. I've worked with these people for a long time as well. And I think that was part of why it was easier to share with them, but it was part of why I'd always done pretty well. The fact that I'd gone to that level and position, because this was a company and people who always looked at, what's this person good at, right? How can we utilize their strengths naturally? Whether they expressed it like that or not, again, I can see in hindsight that if it's very much like, you're good at this, why don't you do that? Why don't you have a look at that? Rather than being kind of stuck in, your job description says this, so you have to fit into this little pigeonhole here that we've created for you. So after speaking to them came me understanding that I'm quite a verbal processor, which is why talking come quite naturally. So with my finance reviews and budgets and things like that, I'd get sent those numbers to review, and then I would have a short catch up with my finance director about talking to the numbers rather than having to get back on email. It was just a lot quicker. Of course, I could get back on email, and I had for years, but the time it took me to do that, they got back in that moment, right? Because 30 minutes of their time was well worth it for all of us.
And we often talk about the challenges. But you've said, what about getting the best in people and looking at that? What are maybe some other success stories or even advantages of those with neurodiverse conditions that you've experienced either yourself or through your coaching?
See, I love that you ask that, because when I train on these things, and when you hear anything about neurodiversity strengths, I could give you creative thinking and analyzing patterns and stuff that you've heard before. I had a client who sort of wrote their own manual, which is something that I encourage when I coach. And it is a much better insight to what strengths look like in the workplace. So I'll tell you some of the things that she says about herself in terms of her strengths. So this is someone who's in a senior leadership role in a multinational organization overseeing commerce strategy and operations. So they say, I have a strong ability to read the room and understand people's needs. I can think big, creatively, and out of the box. I often make connections between different business areas to see benefit and new opportunities in ways that others maybe cannot. I work best when I solve complex challenges that allows for a creative approach. I think quickly, I'm solutions focused and action orientated, and usually get a kick out of turning a challenging situation into a learning opportunity. But I think it's so much more insightful to see how that actually looks in a workplace setting. I see with clients that ability of reading a room, for example. There's a lot of intuitive understanding of situations, and working in projects or sprints. I had a client who loves doing that kind of work. Like this company or this department isn't working very well, so they get hired to go in and fix it, and they love it, and they sort it all out, and everybody loves them for doing that. But then they get bored and they want to stay, because once it's sorted out, like, the job is done. It's things like that that we need to recognize in ourselves as neurodivergent, but also that organizations maybe need to understand, because at that point, an organization can look at that person and kind of go, well, they're not doing such a good job anymore, and her team isn't maybe quite so aligned. And that's because the job is different, it's changed. And it happens the same way as well when we try and promote people. They're doing a great job at what they're doing, and then maybe we promote them into manage a team doing that job. And that's a completely different skill. That might not be what they're good at. So then it feels like they're not really performing. I mean, it can happen to anybody, but it happens a lot with neurodivergent individuals. Whereas we just need to look at what are people's skill sets, talents and strengths, and promote them into roles that are suited for them, rather than thinking that it has to have this linear, when you have to go from here to here to here to here. Sometimes it's better to skip a couple of positions maybe, because that's the way you get the most out of that person. What do you think?
It's good to do on an individual basis, like you say. What is that path for that individual? What are their strengths? What are their skill sets? What direction do they want to go in? And then taking on board all that understanding and different perspectives, and maybe understanding the strengths of someone who is neurodiverse to then have that discussion around what path might be most suitable. How can that benefit a workplace if those conversations are had? I guess not too knowledgeable, because there's only so much, people within a workplace. It's about having a good level of awareness and knowledge to facilitate these conversations. How can that then benefit the workplace, but also the employees' experience and society overall?
There is actually a fair amount of research on the benefits to retention and productivity as well as profitability. Wow. When you get to looking at the value of employee engagement, you have something like 30% increase in profitability to really create environments where everybody is comfortable, where everybody can express themselves, and they're genuinely, intrinsically engaged in what they're doing and what the company is doing. And that's what this boils down to, right? You asked about prevalence earlier, and the neurodivergent community is something like 15 to 20% of the population. That isn't a percentage of the population you want to miss out on. Especially not when you get so many advantages through a diverse workforce and with that much wider view of diversity. You need different thinkers, you need different cultural backgrounds, different upbringings and schooling to really build strong, resilient organizations. It just makes so much sense to me. And I think when you look at it that way, that's what's important. That's the ROI we're looking at here. And obviously at the moment, there's a lot of talk about DEI in workplaces with everything that's happening in America. Everybody knows what it is now. I'm a certified DEI practitioner as well. And when I would say DEI, people would be like, what is that? And now, of course, everybody knows what it is. I think it's that bigger picture, again, about being inclusive and creating organizations and workforces that are profitable and resilient and engaging and fun to work for and retain staff.
Yeah, definitely. And I think with diversity, inclusion, it's about being authentic with it as well. And a lot of businesses are talking about it a little bit more now. They have goals and, initiatives in place to make it a focus across the whole spectrum of diversity and making an inclusive workplace. But I think it's more, the focus needs to be about creating action and positive change to make sure you live and breathe it in a business, not just saying you do, for example, just for a tick box exercise. It needs that genuine buy-in from the top and across the business. That is your culture. You're really invested in having a diverse and inclusive culture, and any of the actions you do are to contribute to that goal rather than just doing something for the sake of it. What practical approaches would you say that businesses could look at to create a more inclusive and more focused from a neurodiverse, neuro-inclusive perspective? What more they could do to create that inclusive feel for their workplace?
So it's definitely a big picture approach, if you will. When I work as a consultant with companies on this, the first thing we do is go in and look at where they are in their journey, right? What are they saying about neurodiversity? Is it part of policies? Do you have separate policies for it? Is it included? What have you? So you need to do a little bit of an audit first. Where are we on this journey? And where do we want to get to? And that way you can create that journey. You need to absolutely make sure that there is some senior leadership sponsorship in there, or it won't have the longevity that it needs to have, because this is a long game, and it should be, because it's all about inclusivity and culture, and that should be important for strong organizations. I think if somebody asked me what could we do, an easy place to start is probably just making job descriptions inclusive, making sure they're using inclusive language, and really look at what matters with that. And that also comes from when we're trying to change the existing workforce and culture, that can be a harder place to start, because there's obviously already something there that might need changing depending on where you work. So starting from the recruitment process, if you will, tends to be an easier place, because those people that are coming in don't necessarily know what to expect. So that's easy to change. Setting things up like peer groups. So whether it is a neurodiversity peer group or it's ADHD or autism, depends a little bit how big your workplace is as well, right? Because that validation and community people find in that, it says that you care, and be those people finding their people. That's why employee peer groups can be really powerful in general. It can be an EDI group. If it's a small company, maybe it's more than neurodiversity, it's an EDI group, and those people who are passionate about that. And I'd say consider how you can offer different ways of working. So to our point of it not being a one size fits all, just looking a little bit more in how can we be more inclusive in everything that we do. So for meetings, for example, can we allow captions in meetings, transcripts of meetings? Can we meet at different times because it just suits people better? AI summaries of meeting, that's just a meeting example. But individualized support, I spoke to a HR manager about this the other day because I really believe in the idea of flexible policies. And I ran it by her because I know as an ex-HR professional, flexible and policies don't necessarily naturally go together. But it really is the way that we've got to look. If we're saying there's no one size fits all, then it's perfectly fine to have policies that say that everybody has to work in the office, for example, like there's no home working, let's say. But we need to be willing to have the conversations with those individuals that might have particular needs or challenges, whether that's neurodiversity, whether they are a parent or a carer. We need to be able to have those individual conversations and not be scared to have them and not be scared to accommodate individual needs. We just got to be really clear about what it is that we're accommodating so that we can create something that's fair, obviously, in terms of the framework around that.
I think the important thing that all this conversation is related to is having consideration, isn't it? That awareness piece, but also being considerate to others and seeing their perspective, and empathy comes into it too. You mentioned peer groups being a potential initiative that businesses can set up internally. What about anything externally? Is mentorship or hearing from other people that have similar experiences, is that beneficial to those with neurodiversity?
Yeah, massively. I'm going to say coaching. And obviously I am a coach and I work in that space. But the reason I say coaching is because, especially for neurodiversity, if you are late diagnosed, and even if you work for the best, most accommodating workplace, they are likely to say to you, oh, right, so you've got autism. How can we help? What do you want us to do? What do you need? And that question can be really, really difficult for someone to answer. There's a lot of figuring out when you get that diagnosis late in life. There's a lot to process. That is just a really good journey to do with somebody who can act as a mentor as well as a coach and support and advice. And I'd say a coach encompasses all of that. The only problem with coaching is the scale thing. Like working one-to-one is a great way for that individual, but for a big company to offer coaching for everybody might be tricky. But there's also things like group coaching, or you maybe set up peer groups, but you invite specialists to come and talk and support that peer group. I'm actually trying to develop something as well in terms of AI and coaching and workplace support, but more on that when I'm clearer about what it is I'm doing. But just to accommodate the issue with scaling and supporting within big organizations.
I guess it's a case of businesses or individuals understanding what resources, support, tools are available and what's most appropriate for them as an individual or the business, deciding what's the best approach. Yeah. So this is a question that we ask all of our podcast guests, and it's something that we hear some fantastic insights from. What would you say is the most valuable piece of advice that you've ever received throughout your career?
Oh, yeah, that is a good question. So it's from really, really long ago, but this obviously stuck with me. I had one of my first boss, and he said, you need to ask the questions you don't know to ask. And I was like, that's just stupid. Obviously, at the time, I was like early 20s. Didn't make any sense to me. I even spoke to my friends outside of work and I was like, what does it mean? But it's stuck with me since then. And what I think I've realized since then is that it's very much, you need to look for what the gap is. Like, what is it that you don't know here? And I think that's really powerful as well when it comes to neurodiversity and how we perceive ourselves. Because we often think, oh, it's me. And I keep saying, it's not you, it's the system, or it's the environment, or it's this situation. It's not you. And I keep saying it over and over again. It's just in different versions and different settings. And I think that's what that was probably about for me. It's not you. It's just look for where the gap is. What is it to know here?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And it ties in with continuous learning, always wanting to learn more and see the gaps of knowledge. And no matter what stage of your career, whether, you're early on or late on in your career, there's always an opportunity to learn and find out answers to the questions you don't know.
I guess like when we were learning as well, because as you can imagine, I've coached quite a few people who sort of either university or even doctors retraining later in life and that sort of thing. And the problem with the learning journey is always you're essentially putting yourself in a space of lots of things you don't know. So you're just getting an awareness of what you don't know all the time. And it can actually have a real knock-on effect on your confidence when you're constantly being bombarded by things that you need to understand more about. It's understanding that that's what it is. That's the journey you're on in that moment. It doesn't mean that you don't know anything or that you are a problem somehow. That's just the space that we're in.
Yeah, definitely. Tina, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. It's been great to chat with you again and hear your insights.
No, it's been absolutely great. As you can tell, I quite like talking. So thank you for having me, and hopefully I'll see you again soon.
That was Conversations with CSG. I'm sure many professionals will relate and see value in the insights shared. Stay tuned for further insights from industry-leading professionals on our podcast, Conversations with CSG. Thanks for listening.